Okay, I'm going to get started. Numbers are still just filtering in, but I don't want to waste any of the time that we have with our brilliant panelists today. I want to get the most out of them. Welcome everyone to Masterclass 5 in our series for building a subscription business. Really great to have you with us today, wherever you are in the world. Today is about shifting an organization to engagement thinking, or shifting to engagement thinking. We have two really exciting guests for you today, and Nick will be doing a discussion with them shortly. Just as ever, we're just going to set up a bit with a bit of context about what we're talking about and why we're here. So we, as Manifesto, have spoken to you previously about engagement and how we think it's an important new way of thinking and a new business model for businesses to align around a leading indicator, performance indicator or metric. It's about understanding customers in the moment and being able to iterate and respond to have commercial impacts on lagging metrics like sales and revenues. Sorry, next slide, thank you. It requires you to think as a team across departments, and for engagement to really work, marketing has to think about how they're engaging consumers, editorial has to think about what content is going to engage consumers, products has to think about the experience and channels that will drive engagement, and of course the data and the tech needs to be there to be able to measure, monitor and iterate around engagement. So it really is a team sport, and it brings together functions and it puts the consumer back at the heart of cross-business, cross-function thinking. And at Manifesto, we're always keen to make sure that things are doable, not just theoretical. And I think the most important thing about engagement is if it is a new way for your organization to think, that you have a quick and easy way to measure based on data you already have. So whether that's recency of engagement from consumers that you can measure through product, frequency that you can maybe measure through content and product, or volume that you can measure across touch points in the journey, finding a metric that your business can start to implement today is kind of the most important thing. We have promised to give you hints and tips through this. So, sorry, yeah, thanks, Kim. I think the most important things we can say about engagement in setting up the conversation today is that it really is about creating consumer-based KPIs or customer audience-based KPIs that allow you to measure what's happening in real time and be able to react to it and have an impact on your lagging metrics. It should help you to think about products and offerings in market differently, what's going to drive customer engagement, and of course the all-important revenue across a customer journey, and to continue to retain those clients and audiences at scale. So hints and tips of what we think is important to landing an engagement way of thinking or shifting an organization to engagement thinking. Next slide, please, Kim, thank you. Hopefully I've covered all these off, but one thing is finding a way to define it within your organization, and our kind of historic experience is that marketing is best placed to create that definition of engagement and to share it out around the business. But actually the most important thing is that engagement is linked to commercial outcomes and not just seen as a consumer metric. Creating a team sport around that, making sure that all the core teams are involved in engagement is key, and that you are focused on balancing driving the customer engagement and the commercial outcomes it has. Huge caveat here, and huge call out, maybe not caveat, is that engagement shouldn't be seen as compromising editorial integrity. It's all about getting the right content to the right customers and the right interactions at the right time to drive valuable, scalable, retainable relationships. So that's a bit about engagement before we get into the panel, and I hand over to Nick. Just a couple of things quickly, and before I do that, Nick is about to take us through a great discussion with Polly and Jess, and I'm really looking forward to it. We want you to get involved as much as possible through that discussion. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you could pop them in the Q&A. For those of you that have been on our masterclasses before, you should know by now, I'm going to be on the Q&A and I'm going to be very active. I will be fielding your questions and I will be passing them over to Nick to bring into the conversation. Please do ask throughout, don't wait till the end to ask. If you have any logistical problems, you can't hear us, you can't see us, because we absolutely want you to be able to do both those things, put those in the chat and Kim will get back to you. I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys through the Q&A through this, and I'm going to hand over to Nick and our guest.
Thank you very much, Jazz. Welcome everybody to Masterclass 5. I'm Nick Smith. I'm one of the founding partners of Manifesto Growth Architects. We're doing this series in conjunction with Pug Pig and Piano, and we intend to do some more. We have a great session next week, which we'll share some more details of with you later. just to position this, this is a conversation unashamedly focused on the media sector. But frankly, what you will hear today and the thinking that exists in media businesses as they've shifted to engagement models is equally applicable across many other verticals. So if you're not working in the media world, listen hard. There are many great things that the media industry have learned about how you engage with consumers to drive lifetime value. We've got two wonderful guests. Polly, give us a wave. Polly Curtis is at Tortoise currently, working at the cutting edge of journalism, developing an inclusive membership model that promises both a sustainable way to fund high-value news content and a profound purpose of reaching across the divides of society to unite people in conversation. She was previously editor-in-chief at HuffPost UK, something I want to learn a little bit about today. And before that, director of media at the British Red Cross. But most of Polly's career has been at The Guardian, where she was a senior editor with wide experience of editing both the website and the newspaper and running the daily news operation. Good news for Polly, or exciting news for Polly. She's joining PA Media as their managing director in October. So Tortoise's loss is PA's gain. Jess, welcome to you, our other esteemed guest. Jess Burney is currently the Managing Director of Direct Marketing and Business Development for Immediate Media. Immediate Media is an award-winning, fast-growing, special interest content and platform company engaging with 26 million passionate customers each month. Immediate is the home to some of the bigger consumer brands, including BBC Food, Good Food, Bike Radar, which we had a little chat about earlier. I think Middle-Aged Men in Lycra is definitely a publication for me. Radio Times, which of course we were all very familiar with and made for mums. Jess's goal is to manage the subscriptions revenue stream as well as working on corporate strategy, including M&A. Jess is a huge advocate, as we'll find out, on subscription strategy and engagement and the metrics in driving organisational change. From media, Jess worked at BBC Studios and Read Business Information. And as you'll discover, she's driven by laser focus on analytics, KPIs linked to commercial understanding. So we've got an R and an story. The marvellous thing is that actually, hopefully, your 2 points of view and perspectives on the world are different. But let's see if that plays out. Question is, maybe what engagement thing to you, your experience in the businesses you worked in?
So thinking to me means better journalism. It means a future for journalism. And deepen your relationship with your audience. And what we've seen over the last 5-10 years, which I'm sure everyone in this call is really, really aware of, is the shift from reach being the main goal to engagement being the main goal. As advertising, more and more of the publishing industry is towards readers, and that means deepening and strengthening your relationship with your audiences. Ultimately, so you can monetize them. But for me, what's most interesting about that is I think it makes better journalism. I think listening, engaging, understanding the questions in your audience's mind makes for a much better information ecosystem.
Very good, very succinct. Jess, how do you take this question?
So I have a different take to Polly, but there's some similarities as I think you were expecting, Nick. So for me, engagement thinking, all about initially understanding who the customers are that you're serving within your organisation. And there may be a variety of customers across many different markets, as we have at Immediate, but what they all have is a real passion for their special interest. So you start with the customer absolutely at the heart of your engagement thinking, but then my focus there would be to get KPIs and a variety of KPIs that the organisation really understands and that teams really buy into, which then allow you to decide and to think about how, by serving your customers and giving them what they want, you're able to monetize that into good ROI. So there's lots of metrics you can measure in any organization, and what you really want to be able to do is have full headline engagement metrics that everybody can understand, but a lot of detail beneath it. And ultimately, your biggest engagement metric is your revenue from your customers growing? Are your profits growing? And do all your engagement guys link back to that? Because it's sometimes easy to fall into a little bear pit where you're interested in seeing metrics of engagement for their own sake, and what you really need to be able to understand is how your cash direct sends back to the product that you're giving to your customers. If you're not seeing that, maybe it's your marketing, maybe it's your technology, maybe it's friction in the customer experience, all those metrics can help you understand where you are. Maybe it's products. Again, all those metrics come together, and that for me is what engagement thinking is all about.
So the commonality for me from those two answers is passion for content and recurring revenues. Is it that simple, Polly? Is it as simple as that?
I think it is. I think what we've just said is basically the same thing, but also exposes one of the challenges in this that was highlighted in your presentation, the presentation at the beginning, which is how you bring the teams together around this. Because the language of marketing is very different to the language of journalism. And it's those kind of cultural differences can't bring the whole team together around the purpose, which is sustainable models, revenue, audience, and for journalism it's also about impact. So I think kind of what we're saying is the same thing. It's kind of different ways of listening, and then being really smart about how you measure that and how you respond to it. I mean, I think kind of going back to my kind of Guardian days, when you're thinking about metrics, we always talked about data-informed editorial decisions rather than data-led editorial decisions, because particularly at the time where I was really growing the digital kind of reach of the Guardian website, there are lots of easy ways to grow reach that aren't very Guardian. So, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to what the data is telling you about how your journalism is traveling and connecting, because that's your kind of listening tool, and that's how you hear that people are engaging with you. But making sure the metrics are right, so you don't kind of that they're aligned with your strategy, so you're not going down someone else's path.
So, Jess, from the conversations we've had coming into this session, almost everything you do is around creating customer value. Do you recognise that dissonance between reach and customer value, or are they just part of the same equation if you measure it correctly?
So I don't think they are the same, because reach for one-off transactions or one-off advertising just about scale. It's about providing an audience who fit a profile, who you're exposing offers. That's one business model. Recurring revenue models, or RP models, which is where we at Immediate have been very focused, all about understanding what your customer does across multiple platforms. So, and it requires skill, it also requires understanding, and it can make for quite a complex story to talk to. And you do need lots of people that really get into all the data, and you need to find a way of having that conversation across your organisation that doesn't require people that are passionate about writing and passionate about reporting to engage too much with a lot of how to put it, less exciting metrics and less exciting discussions that, while they excite the hearts of the analysts that we have, don't quite have the same sort of feel-good factor as some of the journalistic conversations. And sort of doing that does create a lot of, you need to have really good momentum and buy-in in the business to do it. And you really do need to be able to communicate that very effectively. But ultimately, if your goal is to do something like we have with BBC Good Food, which we acquired from the BBC 2 years ago and has just been phenomenally successful. I mean, we've seen huge growth across digital assets, across our other touch points. Our subscriptions have just had a massive boost. And we also, not sadly at the moment, have a live event, one of the biggest consumer events, and being able to join up customer experiences and understanding how a customer is behaving across all those touch points, even their registrations, their web traffic usage, what they're doing with our app. Actually, everybody can understand that, because you can bring that to life. The reporting piece, I think, takes more work, because getting editors and marketing people and senior managers in the organisation to use the same platform, which we're now doing with a tool called Tableau, that takes a lot of work. But that also takes good data scientists to set up the reports in the first place and understand really what people want. So, it's an ambitious thing to do, but it can be done.
I was going to make a flippant comment about data is the most exciting thing you can do with your clothes on, but we'll come back to that. You touched
on that data point, and sorry to go back to the Guardian again. One of the most kind of radical things that happened at the Guardian that really accelerated the digitization of the Guardian was putting the data into the reporters' hands. But it meant creating a tool that was really fit for purpose, and I think it was kind of central to the whole digital change that happened at the Guardian. So one of the audience editors who had roots in the editorial side and the journalism worked with someone from the product team to create a data tool that was eventually socialized across the organization and created a common language that everyone had buy-in to. And there was resistance at first. At first, people were like, "Oh, but this will make us all do clickbait and chase hits." But actually, what it did was give people the power to hear how their journalism was landing. I would never want to go back to a print age now where you publish something and you thought that was it, because you don't have any of that kind of texture about how it's being received and read and consumed and engaged with. That's so important. But the Guardian was really lucky to have the resource to create a bespoke tool that was so well aligned with the values and the editorial values of the organisations. But it took that kind of people from different parts of the organisation coming together to create that common language that was so important.
Sorry, Nick.
You don't need me. You go.
Just to build on that, so I'm just kind of thinking about this as well from the perspective of almost what you do when you don't have that level of insight or metrics. And one of the things that actually our editorial teams really like to know is sales data, not necessarily just, and sales data at its highest level is engagement data. Yes, it's not really detailed. Are they reading this article? How often are they coming back? Where are they going to? But it does tell you, are the things that you're doing driving revenue and the customers buying your product? And I was explaining to Nick just ahead of this session, we've actually had in the subscription space an absolutely phenomenal, amazing, never seen before, and we're a successful organisation, experience with subscriptions in the last 3-4 months, where we saw lockdown demand increase, but we then did a whole load of extra marketing. And in the end, our subscription file has risen by about 100,000 in 4 months. Yeah. And we saw our business as usual marketing double responses. And we also did another 2 separate campaigns that were totally new that actually delivered, again, another doubling response on top of that. And what I was doing in that period that I have to say I've never done before is we developed daily reporting, and daily reporting wasn't something we had in the organisation. We tended to report on a weekly basis or a monthly basis with different metrics. But literally every day I was sending around the sales data with how many people coming on board. We also measured the overall file size. We also measured the cancels. We created new graphs so we could see the trend, and also we could see on a daily basis, zoom into recent trading. And I was really surprised at how many people across the organisation loved this report. I mean, really, really loved it every day when I sent it through, to the point where if it ever was late coming, which I have to confess it was occasionally, I used to get people actually saying, oh, if I've fallen off the list, can I have it please? And this was a huge mix. And I was chatting to a colleague earlier who works on our specialist titles in the sort of knowledge history space, and he was telling me about how he's been sharing the sales with the editorial teams as well, and has been really good for people to hear about this uplift. So engagement metric don't need to always be that complicated. Sometimes it's just anything that shows how customers responding can get people engaged, whether it's 500 customers or 500,000 customers.
Forgive my BBC reporter Sky News moment there. And he wanted to learn about engagement in the media industry. He should stay. It's a good segue. I wanted to shift into the changes that need to take place in an organisation. And again, I know, Jess, you inherited many of the right attitudes and commitments at Immediate, but what are the things that an organisation needs to know, particularly starting out? What are the ways, the first steps that an organisation needs to take? Maybe we'll start with you, Jess.
In some ways, actually, although Immediate was formed, when Immediate was formed, it was formed from a very mature business. It was the BBC Magazine's business that BBC Worldwide at the time sold, plus Craft and a digital platform business. In many ways, it was a new business. So when Immediate was formed in 2011, everybody was new at Immediate, and you had this real marriage of digital people, print people, and a huge ambition for transformation, because the future was moving towards more direct relationships, more recurring revenues, and more digital revenues. And so that did require a huge amount of organisational change. It required new skill sets, new people. But what was really fascinating was how a lot of people came from a more traditional background, came on the journey alongside the new people that came in from outside publishing. And we've had a real mix of publishing people and people from technology companies or people from transactional companies who've come into the organisation, and that alongside obviously editorial, and that sort of marriage of the different thinking and creating that change, all centred around a clear vision and a clear view from the top of what was wanted, has really allowed us to be very, very effective as a management team and very effective as an organisation in just getting things done around a tight brief. So my kind of steer on organisational change is, yes, it's hard. Yes, change is difficult. It's always good to acknowledge the change with people and say, we understand it's difficult, but actually the momentum of change and the momentum of seeing results is incredibly empowering to people. People really like being part of a successful organisation, particularly one that looks after its staff and really focus on the social side of things as well, which is again something that Immediate does very well.
Very good. Polly, you started with a blank sheet of paper at Tortoise. It's always had a clear mission and a clear sense of purpose and what it was trying to achieve. Is that true?
Yes. I'll take a step back and just explain what Tortoise is for people who don't know, because we're still really, really new. We launched last year. We were established to try and do news in a very different way. We wanted to take a very different approach to building a newsroom and a business model around that. And the way that Tortoise is different, the first way we're different is that we're slow. So we're not competing on the breaking news, social media kind of space. We're trying to get really underneath the stories and explain what's driving all these big changes in the world, rather than kind of pouncing on individual things. And the other way that we're different, which is in some ways, particularly for this conversation, more profound, is that we're open. So engagement and engaging with our members in particular, we're a membership organisation, is absolutely at the heart of what we do. And it's what makes Tortoise different. And we do that via a format called a Think-In, which is an event based on an old-fashioned newspaper editorial conference where we gather people into our newsroom. In the old world, it was literally into our newsroom. Now we do it in Zoom calls, kind of 5 or 6 times a week, sometimes more. And we open up the editorial discussion to our members, and we give them a seat in the newsroom to discuss the issues we're thinking about reporting on, that we're about to report on, or that we have reported on, to bring them into that conversation. So the engagement is actually really, really personal and in real life. We know our members by name, they know us by name. We, you know, it's a very kind of real relationship, and to build that membership model around that took a very different approach. We've kind of seen a team of very senior editors from across the industry who come with all this kind of baggage from traditional newsrooms, traditional commercial departments, and we were trying to kind of throw all of that off and say, what would happen if you're starting a newsroom from scratch? What would be the desired elements? And one of them was actually to kind of break down those boundaries between editorial and commercial, between marketing and journalists, and make it all a real team joint effort together. You know, I was at The Guardian for 16 years. My last job was digital editor, and I never once had a conversation with anyone from commercial, literally never once. And that's not, you know, I can see all the arguments for the Chinese walls and the editorial independence, but I think if your business model is your members and your members are driving your journalism, it's really important that you're thinking about all those things together. It's one model together. So, you know, I as a editor at Tortoise have done reporting projects, I've chaired think-ins, but I've also helped build the membership model and the inclusive membership model that distributes free memberships. And really that kind of all came out of a moment back in 2016 when the media was really struggling to find its feet. It was having a really difficult moment around Brexit and Trump, that we weren't engaged enough with our audiences. And what would have the better journalism, but also how would that tackle issues around trust, or members would you know, would believe in you more because you're listening and having an open conversation, taking more soundings about every bit of journalism you're doing that anyone else has. And how would that build trust, and therefore an army of people who are behind your journalism and helping amplify it to have the impact you want to have?
Two very different versions of an answer. What's clear from both of your observations, there's a real sense of having a clear sense of who it is, who you are, and what you're there to do, either in terms of the product or positioning of the business, or in the engine that drives the business, in your case, Jess. And those belief systems, once said, everything has a beginning and muddle end. And most businesses are in a muddle, particularly in the media space. What do you do? What is one thing that you do? How do you get this going? What do you change? Content, is it platform, or is it, what gets you into this? Maybe Polly, you can go first.
So I'm going to take that in two parts, and one is really drawing on my previous experience, because those were very big change projects. So The Guardian and HuffPost were big, really big change projects. At The Guardian, change was led by specific interventions, like creating a data tool that everybody could use and that would make everyone understand the impact of their journalism. So that was a big accelerator in the change process. But also finding the cross-cultural teams that you put together to accelerate the change, and actually working around a lot of the blockers. Because, you know, The Guardian has changed hugely, and there's no one who's not on board with digital now, but it took a very long time. There were very slow processes. There were big moments of resistance. There were 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, you know, all of those moments. And I think, you know, what I've seen in a lot of the academic research around digital change, particularly in newsrooms as well, is work around blockers, promote the change makers within the organisation, and that kind of starts to shift the whole culture of an organisation. At HuffPost, interestingly, because HuffPost was, the whole thing was built on scale and Facebook, and I became editor at HuffPost just when the scale game was in real decline, where Facebook was twiddling all the dials and we were losing traffic, and it was really difficult. And the proposition for HuffPost in terms of revenue was in quality contexts for native advertising and sponsored content. And so we were looking to shift from chasing traffic everywhere on the internet to really developing our purpose and what we were for. And the way I did a big cultural leap at HuffPost over that was we did a big marketing activation where we closed the London newsroom. We opened an open newsroom in the middle of the Bull Ring in Birmingham and had an open door policy with all these events, bringing people in, and it was called HuffPost Listen. And it was all about putting us at the heart of communities, getting HuffPost out of the bubble, reflecting kind of real world places. And that was a huge shift in the mindset of the team. It's a smaller team, so you could use one big moment to change mindsets and to show the value of listening for reporting as well as kind of churning out stories.
That's a good link back to you, Jess. The value.
So in terms of demonstrating value and getting organisational buy-in, I think it normally helps if you've got a kind of top-down mission statement, if you like, to actually give the organisation and get people behind. So whether that's kind of doubling your recurring revenues over 3 years, or bringing on board another, whatever the right number is, 100,000, 15,000 customers, or moving into a space where 50% of your customers buy another product from you, whatever the right metric is, it's really, really good to have that from the top. But then you get into the, okay, we've got the mission, it sounds great, but what does that really mean? And particularly if you're in a place like Polly described, which is you've got a big group of cross-department stakeholders and implementers who are critical to this, who are all coming at it from their own perspectives, who all kind of aren't sure whether they should start first or the other guys, and it can feel really hard. And in my experience, you need to spend a bit of time just discovering just understanding the different participants in the project, in order then to be able to say, okay, which bit do you start with? Do you start with the product first? Do you start with the tech platform first? Do you start with the customer first? And I really loved your example, Polly, of the HuffPost example. I'm actually going to give an example of a cross-discipline project, which is actually a subject that everybody hates, just to be contrasting and just to be data-driven, which is actually our approach to GDPR, which was a cross-company approach with lots of different stakeholders and lots of different viewpoints. And if you like, quite an ingrained belief for a lot of commercial people that the thing that really mattered was making sure you had the biggest possible database of people to talk to. And my particular team didn't really think that was quite right. They thought what really mattered was having a group of customers that wanted us to talk to them. And so in the end, we took an approach which wasn't necessarily the approach that a lot of people did, but we did a very good, my team did a very good comprehensive program. I can't take the credit, it was all them, to encourage and invite customers to hear from us, and giving them really good reasons why they would want to. And they were confident that this felt respectful of the customer, but also because we knew how engaged our customers were, it felt like low risk. And because we had really good data, we could actually, as we started the campaign, really see who was responding and who was interested. And what we found were, yeah, we did actually find a lot of people fell off our database, but when we analysed those people, didn't really want to hear from us anyway. They were people who weren't opening our emails, who weren't particularly interested. So in the end, we ended up, which is a much smaller, tighter, more focused database of people that really wanted to hear from us. And what was really interesting is our responses post GDPR to our marketing actually had a brief uptick post the piece, and then they actually settled down to being the same levels as they were before. So I think kind of starting sometimes with what's the customer want is always quite safe, because as soon as you can get some insight into what they want to do, you can build out from that. And it's always much easier to argue a viewpoint when you've got some concrete data than it is with a viewpoint where it's quite subjective and it's based on sort of theory rather than real life execution.
Yeah. I'm just going to pick up on from the floor, so to speak. It's back at you, Jess. You may have answered it, but you just see if you want to build on this, because it's a challenge around the connection of the vision for your business into really listening to customer needs, into identifying new propositions. Are they connected? How would you respond to that challenge or that question around vision into really listening into developing propositions?
So how I tend to work is with hypotheses, scientific data. So probably not a surprise, but I always start with a hypothesis, and sometimes the hypotheses are right and sometimes they're not right. And so once you've kind of built out your view of what you think it is that the customer wants, the next thing to do is to actually go out there and do something to test it. And that might be as simple as just sending a survey, a well thought through survey, to those customers who you think are interested. So when we've launched new products, we've typically put some feelers out there, put them in front of customers beforehand and seen how they respond. Now, customers don't always then respond in real life in the same way they do in the surveys, but it gives you a starting point. And also what you always find is that they'll tell you about things they don't like. So even if in the end you don't get quite the hypothesis response that you want, I normally find that what you find is people tell you what they don't like, and then at least you can actually iterate and fix those things. And sometimes it's quite hard to put yourself in your customer's shoes, because you're busy there looking at your commercial KPIs, and so going back to customers and listening to customers is really helpful. We get customers who get in touch with us from time to time. I love those customers because that's real life engagement metrics telling you in real life what they haven't liked, and that really does amplify and add a human touch to your metrics that tell you how good your partners have been in terms of answering calls, answering emails, resolving problems. So there's that real perspective on it as well.
So taking the theme of listening back to you, Polly, I know it's a central tenet of Tortoise, but you've indicated it's something that's been common to the work you've done in other organisations. What do you really need to listen to, and what things change? What are the changes? You change the product? Do you change the marketing? And what's the outcome you're looking for?
Well, that's such a good question, because I think that's been at the heart of what we've been discovering at Tortoise through the whole startup period of the last kind of year and a half. The idea is that if you open up the ideas of journalism that you're reporting on to the scrutiny of your members, they will bring better ideas to it, they'll bring better challenge to it, you'll get a better sense of the external kind of debate around it. It will improve your ideas at the heart of it. But that really extends across everything we do at Tortoise. So we have, a really kind of ongoing dialogue with our members about product and about formats and about how they want to receive our journalism and take part in it, because actually the central product of Tortoise is the thinking and the opportunity to engage and be part of the conversation. And I think the difficulty of being a startup that's based around listening is knowing when to stop listening and do. Actually the real challenge, and I think it is just, also being a startup from a lot of people who have worked in very established organizations, the real challenge is knowing how much to iterate, when to arrive on a format, and certainly the central thing of Tortoise that we're all completely aligned around is the thinking. The thinking is the thing that makes us different, the thing that members come to us for and engage with, and also it has a kind of commercial application. We do a lot of thinkings with commercial partners, so that is the central thing that we've arrived at through a year and a half. How that then feeds the journalism is still an open question. We're still working out how that works, because it's not a democracy. It's not like ultimately people subscribe to and become a member of Tortoise because they trust us to hold the pen but they trust us to listen more than anyone else listens in journalism. So I think your question is really good, and that has been the hardest thing I think about doing a startup on this model, is knowing which formats and products to kind of really settle on, the best way of testing them in real life, because there's so many things that can affect the success of a story, if that's the product you're talking about. What else is happening in the digital space that day, what one person tweets at a certain time. There's so many different variables around that can affect the metrics and the outcome. Really being rigorous about how you judge success is really, really challenging and difficult, particularly when you're a startup working on quite small scale to start with.
Very good. I'm going to start pulling questions from the floor. We've only got 15 minutes left. Who'd have thought it? I know, again, Jess, we had a lovely conversation about you can never stop with data. You can always be in the pursuit of perfect because you'll never arrive. The interesting thing for me, though, is so many organisations are paralysed by choice and can't make decisions. So if either of you, this is a question to both of you. I'll start with you, Jess, though, but if you could do 3 things in your organisation perfectly, seamlessly, brilliantly, flawlessly, and always get them right, what would those 3 things be?
Okay, so the things I think are most important are getting the right KPIs in place, because they're the things that tell you whether your organisation is performing, and they need to be the right ones. Because if you measure the wrong KPIs, you can go down completely the wrong track. And just alluding back to the start of the conversation, which is reach versus engagement, you don't want the same metrics for a reach organisation as you do for an engagement organisation. And when you're looking at your products and deciding which products to invest in, you want metrics that tell you whether or not that's a product that people want to consume frequently, whether it's a product that people are willing to pay a high enough price for. So all those metrics lead to a commercial model that says success, or a commercial model that doesn't create enough revenue to cover your costs. So KPIs for me are the biggest thing. The next thing is actually having the right capabilities from a platform perspective to measure. So you've got your KPIs, but you need the measurements, you need the data to actually look at them. And actually for startups and smaller organizations, and I've looked at quite a few smaller organizations and startups on the strategy side, and there are some wonderful tools out there that people use that you can use in a small organization that really will help you understand how your business is performing. But being able to keep an eye on your trends is very important. Thinking about how people are behaving later in the relationship as well as early in the relationship, because you need to make sure you're measuring whether people are sticking with you, and if not, why not, and what you're going to do about it. And then the ability to zoom in, because it's all very well to have a really nice set of annual KPIs that are showing good growth, but if your growth starts to stall in the last week or month, you need to be able to act on that in order to make sure that you're hitting the trajectory that your investors are probably looking for. So data and the ability to use that from a platform perspective, doesn't have to necessarily be a big huge platform if you're a smaller organization, really important. And then the final thing I would identify is the right people. You absolutely need to have really, really good product people. That is a given. Editorial people are at the heart of publishing, super important. You also need to have the right direct marketing people, the right analysts, and the right technical people to make things happen. And if you've got any gaps there, it's surprising how a gap in the right place can create disruption in what you're doing that slows you down.
So at that point, when I say you've got the right people here with Plug, Pig and Piano jointly being part of this collective, being the right technical and the right product and the right data people. But anyway, that's another thing. It's the ad for the other guys. Go on, what are your 3 things?
I would totally agree with all of those, really boringly, but I would add one extra ingredient, which is how you communicate all those different things. So the kind of communication flows across an organization, so you have a shared language around the KPIs, around the priorities, that kind of bring the different editorial and product thinking together. So I think I would totally echo everything Jess said, but add because now I've got 4 because I cheated.
And I want 4 as well, so can I share Polly's?
So communication is, none of those things work, I think, without having a structure and a kind of framework for communication, but also a culture around communicating that kind of brings those things together.
Thank you. I agree with both of you. There you go. So in the chat, in the questions, there are people raising questions around some of the tensions that businesses have around scale as a counterpoint to budget affordability, as a counterpoint to driving engagement. Where's the value in the engagement model when actually people still want to achieve a certain scale? So, Tortoise is not it's not a scaled business. It's a highly engaged business. You don't appear to be a business that is especially cash strapped. I know you're still a startup. What are the tensions in your business around reach versus digital engagement investment versus those kind of church and state things that happen in so many organisations between doing the right thing and doing the thing you can?
So the tensions are practical and cultural, and when you look at the metrics we look at, membership is the absolute number one metric. Are they members? Are they engaged members? And then revenue, obviously, as well. It's very, very hard to wean yourself off the top of the funnel and to be clear about what the top of the funnel is for. Particularly when you're a group of editors who come from the BBC and the Guardian and the Times, who are used to publishing things and being able to have impact with things just because you publish them. When you're doing something small, it takes a huge amount of work to actually get people to see it. And I think the tension there is how much effort you put into filling the top of the funnel and just getting eyeballs on what you're doing, and satisfying the bottom of the funnel, which is the really engaged members. And there are definite tensions there, particularly because, with slow news, the whole point was not to chase the stuff that's breaking. The way to get, just the number one rule about how to get stuff read is be relevant at the right time. So if you publish something that feels irrelevant now, it's very, very difficult to fill the top of the funnel. Yeah. So the tension has been between those two places. And I think the kind of the difficulty is about working out what filling the funnel is for, because we also just are journalists who would quite like people to see our brilliant journalism as well. And so making sure that even if you get 50,000 people reading that article, that has an onward journey that brings those people closer to Tortoise, rather than just going job done.
Very good. I'm going to ask you a different question, Jess. The questions from the floor are coming in. They're quite spiky, some of these. Here's one about the future of subscriptions post-COVID, and particularly around print subscriptions. Is print dead? I mean, we obviously don't think it is, none of us here, but what about print subscriptions, and isn't everything going digital? What's your take?
Well, I think I'd have to challenge that view very strongly, on the basis that the demand I've seen has been phenomenal. I mean, one particular brand in one particular week was 2,000% up year on year. To be fair, the rest of the time has been, a couple of 100% up year on year over the whole period. Consumers still love reading. And at the moment, print is still a good reading experience. Will consumers continue to want to read print on its own forever? Who knows? But certainly from a kind of growth perspective, we've seen huge growth in the last few months. And also we've seen huge growth on higher yielding offers. So we haven't bought this circulation in. We've actually put slightly higher yielding offers out there, because we didn't want to just bring in, again, haven't got time to get into it, but bringing in good quality customers is key for us. And also our retention metrics on our early cohorts very good. So I think in times of crisis, people need comfort, people need things to entertain them. And what I very much hope is across all our platforms, because we bring entertainment to people fundamentally and a way of connecting with their passions or a business information that people are interested in, the publishing industry actually comes out of COVID in some ways stronger, alongside obviously of having to fight for revenue streams that have been disrupted by lockdown and you know, other pieces. So I can't guarantee print is going to be with us forever, you know, past my lifetime, who knows? We might all be kind of, you know, in all sorts of different things, but certainly for the foreseeable, print alongside all the other ways of connecting with our consumers is a really big part of what we do. And I see that continuing.
Very good. That's going into my summary in a few minutes. One for both of you, quick fire question. Should editorial be given sales targets?
I think that's where the communication bit comes in. And I've seen that go really, really, really wrong and really subvert the principles or the kind of core purpose of a publication. But I also think we all want to be ambitious and sustainable. So I think it's about how you frame it, how you understand things that aren't met, how you don't penalise learning from failure, you know, things like that. Ultimately, I think really practical and important, but I think it's all about the framing.
And I think that's a really interesting question, and one you have to be very careful about what you do, because it could be quite damaging, because where what you really want is for your writers and your editors to create brilliant content that people really enjoy, that people come back for. That's really about a judgment of people that get words and get pictures and get talking to people about what's going to do it. And you want something that has its own life that people really love. And so translating that into a direct sales target, what does that really mean? Giving people a stake and a reward for a company succeeding, brilliant. I think that's a really good thing to do. But asking somebody to write something that gets 100,000 people to read it,
yeah.
I don't know, that feels like an interest, you know, possibly kind of a bit off-putting if what you're really trying to do is just create some great journalism.
As we're coming to the end, just before I try and summarise this brilliant conversation, which I'm going to fail miserably to do, we build this as it's a masterclass, the top tips in building engagement and getting an organisation to buy into the engagement model. What were the three top tips? You can be one, but if you want to give me the three things, I'll start with you, Polly, the three top tips, practical top tips that you would offer the audience that we have here today.
Being very clear about what you're listening to, so that comes to the point about what the measurements are. Being very clear about how you're communicating that to your teams, and knowing your kind of core purpose, knowing what you're there for, and that everything else follows that. Because I think it's easy to get distracted by, oh, that worked once, let's go off and do that loads more times. But actually coming back to your core purpose and challenging yourself to be really rigorous about all those things as well, because there's lots of stories you can tell yourself to create a KPI or to wriggle out the KPI, but being really rigorous about those things. So listening, communicating, and the third one I said that I've forgotten.
Very good. Jess?
So mine I would agree those are all really good things to do. My add-ons would be about frequency of communicating what you're doing and how you're performing.
Yeah.
When you're doing something new and tough, you can't communicate enough. The more you talk to people in tough times and, you know, encourage people, the better. Equally, making sure that you are honest with yourself. So if you see that something isn't working, correct it, you know, sort something out. And if you do see it's working, really go out there and celebrate the success and make sure that people really feel this has been a tremendous thing and that their efforts are acknowledged.
Very good. Somebody once said truth is repeated propaganda, but repeated correct data. So my summary is clarity of, there are five things we need, apart from people, that would make 6, 5. Clarity of vision, mission or purpose, and frequency and quality of communication and a shared language, 1. 2 is cross-functional. It's all about alignment around product, tech, consumer and the business to deliver the outcomes and purpose that you're hoping for. 3, listening, understanding, responding to. It's not just around gathering customer insight, needs and behaviours, it's how you then apply it. Data drives everything. If you want a sustainable business that's creating lifetime value, you have to build it around customer data, including the right KPIs. And then lastly, what you both, without saying, well, you've used the word, we live in a multi-platform world where the consumer will, our readers, our users will consume our product across a number of platforms. And to bring that together, you need to do it across the enterprise and across the titles and across the audiences. You've been, you two. Thank you so much for your time. Absolutely wonderful. I've enjoyed it. I can't believe that we're at a minute 2. I need to hand back to Jazz, and I hope everybody in the audience has a very enjoyable time. And I'm sorry if we've not answered everybody's questions. Many thanks. Jazz.
Thank you so much, Nick, Jess and Polly. I think the one build I would make on Nick's 5 things is one thing that really struck me as a great anecdote or a hint or tip is this idea of almost, Jess, you've created your own newsroom around that data dashboard and sending it out and actually becoming, you know, your own news within and having your own thing to share internally that gets kind of people excited is a great maybe hint or tip that people can take away to start doing themselves. How can I create my own metric-based newsroom for my internal audiences? Thank you so much for that. Really, really fascinating. And also started to pick up on some stuff that we will cover next week as well. So getting yourself out the muddle. Polly talked about the kind of the cornerstone things that you are true to in your organization, like the think-ins. How do you get them to market and how do you get them to market at speed and continue to iterate them? That is really the focus of next week's July 15th Masterclass with Johnny and his guests. They are going to focus on how to build awesome digital products at speed. I think speed is definitely something that people are interested in right now as well. Very topical. Thanks once again, Jess, Polly and Nick. We look forward to seeing you at our next Masterclass, everyone that is joining that. Also, just to remind you, our email addresses are along the bottom. The Twitter tag is there as well, and also we have our website. If you do want to talk to us, if you don't feel like your questions were answered today, we are always around and willing to chat. Thanks so much.
Next week, Jazz. It is next week. It is the 15th next week.
Time has blurred for me. It's on a day in July. We will see you there. Thank you so much. Do keep talking to us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everybody.